Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this session. It is an honor after persone del calibro del Professor John. This presentation is part of the data of my doctoral study on the Calabrian community of Adelaide. I am investigating the construction and transmission of ethnic identity among participants originated from rural Calabria across 3 generations. The specific presentation concerns a field where a sense of place and belonging is embodied and to an extent idealized. The scenario is the domestic space of Italian-Australian grandparents, the Nonni, who migrated to Australia between the 50s and the 70s. This is the presentation outline. Participants originate from the poorest areas of Calabria, specifically Diaspore meaning harsh mountain. It is a relatively isolated area, 840 meters above sea level. The economic miracle which overturned the depression in the rest of Italy between the 50s and the 70s bypassed Calabria. Poverty, overpopulation, together with political agreements between Italy and Australia during the second post-war period, brought Calabrians to Australia. After the Second World War and until 1953, Calabria became the most represented Italian region in Australia. During the 70s, Calabrians represented the largest percentage of any Italian regional group. Their presence generated racist attitude among the Anglo-Australian dominant group due to their inability to speak English, their skin color, their association with poverty, low education, and organized crime. And this was concomitant also with the legacy left by the White Australia policy. Although it was dismantled in 1973, Southern Italians were targeted of racial discrimination for decades. We all know this. Whites were Anglo, Calabrians were considered not yet white ethnic. The significance of this study consists in exploring ethnic identity by reflexive ethnography across 3 generations. I focus on the participants' diachronic histories, but also to the synchronic cultural practices now, their emicity, and the transmission across 3 generations, and also the mapping and analysis of the participants' genealogies. O'Connor and Rose, and then Rose, have examined the settlement of Calabrians from Colonia in Adelaide. They focus mainly on the first generation, based on demographic records. However, this study is based on an intergenerational reflexive ethnography that draws on cultural anthropology. Sociolinguistics, who investigated on 3 generations, approached identity by mainly focusing on language maintenance and choices. Although socioanthropological studies focused sufficiently on Italian Australians, they mainly investigated the social incorporation of the first and their children, the second generation, which was studied exhaustively by Baldassar, Basta, Pallotta Ghirolli, Marotta. There is few literature on the 3 generations. Many researchers have considered the Italians demographically and historically, some as an homogeneous group, some ascribed to them static core values, some deprived the subjects of their study from their voices by creating a disjuncture between the scholar's ethic point of view and the agent's emic perspectives. Some exceptions were Cronin in the 70s with the Sicilians in Sydney, Pascoe, Baldassar with the Sanfioresi in Western Australia, Vanni, Ricatti. My contribution consists in my double role as a researcher and an engaged participant, specifically a folkloric musician. I was involved as a volunteer in 4 Calabrian clubs. Among the community, people knew me as Usonaturi, the musician. The significance of my study consists also in my choice in involving ontological and existential lexicon in the field of migration. My ethos, my spirit, merged with their eidos, so the expected, or what is expected to be expected, just to use Margaret Mead's lexicon. This is just a small representative sample of some of the key works about Italians in Australia. There is literature on Calabrians that investigate the construction and transmission of ethnic identity across the 3 generations. Recently, Lipari Marcuzzo linked memory, migration, spirituality, and cultural practice of the first generation Australians. Misiti predicted the imminent dispersal of Calabrian culture The main factors at risk were the language and the sense of identity of the second generation. The present study contrasts with Misitis' study and moves beyond the historians and the historians of the truth approach. So the historian's truth. Yesterday Angela Scarino said something about the historian's truth. And also Derrida, if you remember, mentioned that the media and history informs the facts, not on the facts. In this presentation I chose to focus on one aspect, the binomial emotions and practices. My theory includes Italian cultural anthropology, considerations of power, complemented with interpretive anthropology, which takes into account symbols and the participants' performances. While De Martino and Gramsci allow me to analyze the immigrants and the children's perceptions of being Italian, for an interpretation of the third generation, I drew upon notions of the accumulation of cultural capital and symbols, which, following Geertz, are extrinsic sources of information within webs of significance, and they are used to express worldviews. As per Gramsci, there is much more than the dichotomy hegemony and subalternity, especially if we link Gramsci with Ernesto De Martino's theory of the presence, the struggle for individuals to affirm their presence, their presenza. And you can see that such presenza, the presence, is a notion similar to the Heideggerian Dasein, in the way such presence, such presenza is subjectively perceived as ethnic by individuals. This research is based on an analysis of 3 years of fieldwork within the Calabrian community of Adelaide, participants' observation, face-to-face interviews, note-taking of both the signifiers and the signifieds of the participants, and the reflexive interpretation of the ethnography allowed me to be ethnographic. One of my objectives was to reduce the distance between the interviewer and the interviewed. I gained insight within the ethnic community by playing the role of the traditional Calabrian musician. I observed, I cross-checked. Last time at the seminar I said cross-dressed, so I cross-checked. My double role as both a researcher and an engaged participant positioned me in an angle that views the research process as one in which researcher and reciprocators, not informants anymore, are engaged in co-constructing a world. As an insider, I observed closely a variety of cultural practices. For example, I played the Calabrian lira, the musical instrument, the organetto at many events. I made the salami. I went hunting for the first time with my participants. I witnessed how Nonna Caterina, who is a famous character in Seaton, South Australia, removes the evil eye, Marocchio. I went with Peter to buy his new Fiat 500 with the Italian stripe. Lastly, I relied on the software Envivo, partially, very partially, which gave me an idea of the intergenerational evolution of the word wog, used by participants from a disparaging term to an adjective, sometimes of quality. And I was already partially aware of this after Maria Parlotta Chiarolli and Elisabetta Sala's studies. The participants consist of 30 adults who reflect different immigration generations. The first generations were born in Calabria, migrated in the 50s. Second generation are the children. The third generation are the children of the second generation. This presentation focuses mainly on them, whose group is constituted of university students or office workers. Extracts of interviews and 3 case studies have been selected as representative of my research. Now we can start. Case study 1, a lunch with a family 1. The image you see there is the genealogy of family 1. As you can see 3 generations. The triangle is the male, the circle is the female, the equal sign is the marriage bond, the vertical line is the descent line. Family 1 is composed of Vince, 55, who is married with Pina, 50, both second generation. They have 2 children, Rocco and Francesca, and all of them were born in Adelaide. The first generation were composed of Rocco and Bettina, both born in Calabria and passed away at the time of the study, unfortunately. I have lunch with family 1. Pina, while serving some zeppole with anchovies, recalls that when she was younger, she didn't even know what the word nonna, grandmother, meant. Differently, her son, Rocco, says that He has a number of happy memories with this nonni. He mentions the nonna schecca, playing Italian cards with nonno, Sunday's lunch at the nonni's place, watching the Mass in Italian celebrated by the Pope at the Basilica di San Pietro in Roma, while they were all eating ravioli. It was at their nonni's place that Rocco and Francesca learned how to dance the tarantella. Rocco claims that even being picked up from school by Nonna Bettina was wonderful, and this quote is significant since Rocco's mother, Pina, was constantly ashamed during her childhood 30 years ago when picked up from school by her immigrant mother. After lunch, we watched a family video of 10 years before. There is Rocco, who was about 12, crushing the grapes and having fun with his nonni at Seaton, South Australia. While watching that, Rocco shows me a mole that he has on his finger, which was identical to his nonno's, the same position, and he claims that they have the same Italian blood. Francesca evokes certain scents and practices experienced at her nonna's place. In particular, Nonna's soft hands, her perfume, her voice while singing Italian songs. And we heard yesterday in a presentation that memory is very selective. Scarini and Mercurio were recalling Pierre Nora, Ricoeur, also Passerini. When Francesca was 17, she deliberately asked to her nonna how to make the meatballs because she wanted to impress her boyfriend, who called her a fake Italian. She had an Italian surname, but she couldn't cook. At her nonni's place, she also learned the believed Calabrian expression, he's a bacala, he's a fool, and the practice of serving the man first. Case study 2, another family. Removing the malocchio, the evil eye. And this is a day at Nonna Caterina's place in Seaton. The evil eye, malocchio, is a widespread belief among my participants, old and young. Family 2 is composed of Giovanni, 75, and his wife, Caterina, 70. Now she's 75. She's always been a housewife. Since Dominic and Angela both have a full-time occupation, they only look after their granddaughters, Rosemary, 12, and Kathy, 5, every afternoon. And this is taken from my field notes. While ringing the bell, I see a ferro di cavallo, horseshoe, on the door. Giovanni opens the door. His granddaughter is behind him. He welcomes me in Calabrian. Simone, come ta passi? Simone, how is it going? And I reply, Don Giovannino, tutto bene. E voi? Don Giovannino, all good. And you? Of course, I didn't have the audacity to correct in any way Don Giovanni on his Calabrian. I use the allocative pronouns don and voi to stress the respect he expects to have. Giovanni tells me that Rosemary is always with him, following him as a buddeggino, little chick. He also tells me that he had recently taught her how to make the coffee with a caffettiera. Since Giovanni is watering the tomatoes with Rosemary, I go inside. Inside, I notice on the wall an old tambourine and a small square with a written, "Happiness is being married to an Italian." Actually, there was another one with written, "Fatevi cazzi vostri." There is also a large iconographic collection of holy pictures of Pope Francis in the corridor. In the corridor, I came across a lady who is just about to leave, and she nods at me. In the kitchen, I see Nonna Caterina dealing with a plate, oil, and a santino, a holy picture. I understand the reason that woman has come, to have her malocchio, evil eye, removed. Caterina is well known within the community for removing the malocchio in Seaton. Playing on the ground with 3 markers and holy pictures, there is her granddaughter, Kathy. I ask, what is this beautiful baby doing here? And Nonna Caterina replies, she's helping the nonna. Then I ask Caterina to be sumecato, purified from the evil eye. And she agrees. She grabs a plate, pours some water, and then with her index she throws a few drops of oil. The holy image falls on the ground. Caterina asks to her granddaughter, pigliamilo gioia, grab it, honey. Kathy grabs the holy picture and her nonna says, grazie bella. The oil in the dish expands and Caterina says to me, fuoco mio, si docchiato figlio. Oh my gosh, you have the evil eye, my son. Then she says, ora o cacciamo, now we'll get rid of that. And she starts the ritual. And at home, while reflecting on my field notes, I recalled Bourdieu when saying that certain cultural practices can be internalized into the habitus as a product of collective history. And I also thought of some scholars who say that an ethnic habitus shapes ethnic identity. And then I asked myself, to what extent an internalization of an ethnic practice has to do with one's ethnic identity? Is it all a matter of practice or performance? Case study 3, the last one, making the satizzi. This case study concerns a day with the family 3. In June 2014, I spent all day by making the salami with Anthony's family. Anthony is a 34 years old man. His family is composed of Nonno Antonio and Nonna Gina, who passed away, sadly. Anthony's father, 60, born in Adelaide, and Anthony's mother, who unfortunately passed away. The two men are helped by Anthony's wife, originating from Calabria, and some cousins. They all gather to make the satizzi, salami, an annual family tradition which is now carried out by Anthony, who has learned everything from Nonno Antonio. And I'm asked to come and play the lira, since the family will celebrate the results of their work by dancing the tarantella. I am at Anthony's place. I see a Vespa Piaggio parked in front of his house. Pasquale, Anthony's father, opens the door and welcomes me in English. How you doing, Mike? I reply in English too. Good morning, Pasquale. Despite the fact that the weather is not that cold, Anthony is making some hot zeppole. It's the Italian tradition, he says, before showing me his place. The house has modern furniture. In the living room there are posters of Italian classic movies on the wall. In the kitchen I see an expensive red Italian coffee machine. Hung on the shelf there are 3 funnels imbuti, of different sizes representing Pinocchio. Very expensive one. Essentially I see many objects that may recall Italy, but different from the ones I usually see in the houses of the first generation participants. However, when Anthony shows me his bedroom, I see something different. There is a display cabinet representing a microcosm of his Calabrian family. I see a wedding picture of Anthony and his wife during their trip in Calabria. There is a photographic enlargement showing him and his at his nonni's place in Adelaide. A very young Anthony playing the nonno's organetto, concertino. The cabinet exposes that precious object that Nonno Antonio brought with him when he migrated to Australia. The organetto was passed on to Anthony when he was a child. You see the ontological sense of the objects and identities we spoke yesterday. Anthony tells me that he learned the Italian stuff mainly from his nonno, like growing the tomatoes, or the Italian value, who wants justice, don't wait for it, just go for it. Or be a man, he learned from a song that his nonno used to sing. Lying on a marble table in the veranda, there is 150 kilo pig, killed and washed the evening before. Anthony gives aprons and knives to everyone and says, okay, put the fat into the bucket. Just because I'm Italian and originate from Calabria, everyone expects me to know this practice very well. While tearing off the pig's nails, I realized that we are all following a functional practice of gendered division of labor. Indeed, while we all men are in the veranda outside cutting up the pork, the women are in the kitchen preparing the sauce for the pasta. Pasquale tells me in English that he's never enjoyed and fully learned how to make salami. Despite the fact that he's been making salami with his father for ages, he was pretty much forced. And the real expert of the family is Anthony. The women are making room for the dancing, while some men are playing briscola, Italian card game. Now we are all ready for playing music. Anthony takes a seat, tunes the accordion, has a sip of wine, and then coughs once. His father looks at him and says, "Gosh, sputato a tuo nonno. You look like the spitting image of your grandfather." And Anthony smiles. In conclusion, the nonni's place is a key locus generator of ethnic identity. The practice of certain cultural practices at the nonni's place, when positively evaluated, suggests an incorporation of an ethnic being, which is then often displayed and intentionally manifested. Within the nonni's place, an idealization of Italianness takes place. A number of everyday moments recalled at nonni's house have been romanticized and considered as Italian stuff per se. For example, watering the tomatoes or feeding the chickens were seen as a priori Italian practices. And this practical emotions pattern brings to the equation I feed the chickens with nonno, plus that's Italian stuff, plus I love nonno equal I love Italian culture. Such equation links the practice with the subjectivity. That makes me reflecting yesterday on Lucy's incorporation and transformation into an imagined version of a Calabrian grandmother of the 50s. Moreover, the intergenerational transmission of cultural practices, when positively perceived, follow a process of filiazione inversa, an inverted filiation, in which tradition is seen as an inverted filiation. In other words, if the children of the immigrants have tended to reject the foreign ways of their parents and join the dominant mainstream, the next generation expresses the wish to retain the identity markers of their ancestors, in this case of their nonni, and to reproduce their traditions and act more ethnically than their parents. Therefore, metaphorically speaking, they are the parents' parents. Clearly, this does depend on a number of factors, in premise of the individual's institutional positionality, which is an important finding of my thesis, which is the individual's perception of a person's being ethnic in the world in the present moment. By acknowledging the institutional positionality, one can understand the Huberian socio-cultural switches in Australia from pasta to pavlova, or vice versa, from pavlova to pasta. Lastly, grandparents' personal belongings are markers of ethnicity, and especially when the nonno is passed away, they can be kinds of fetishes in terms of objects of veneration. Emblematic is the accordion passed to Anthony. I define that as a feticcio etnico, ethnic fetish, that can have a catectic character in terms of charged by symbolic energy, and therefore play a complementary role in nurturing the ethnic identity of the possessor. Very similar to the discourse of Ilaria Vanni's studies and homely objects. But here it has, again, the signified is more prominent. To conclude, within the domestic scenario of Italian-Australian grandparents, the relevance of the nonni is crucial for the dynamics of ethnic identity construction and transmission. The binomial emotions and practice regards both the subjective ethnic presence that individuals perceive and the objective one, the physical one, which involves the practice and emotions. Thank you very much.